Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Caitlin Wallakonis, and I'm the Alumni Relations Coordinator at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. We are excited to join us for today's webinar, The Art of Presence, presented by Tricia Homer, Executive Communication Coach and full-time faculty member at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. This webinar is part of the Smith Office of Alumni Relations Professional Development webinar series, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. During the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and Tricia will address them at the end of the presentation. Tricia coaches EMBA and full-time MBA students on effective speech and voice projection, visual presentation, and projecting self-confidence. She also teaches business communication in the MS program. At HG Venture, a leadership and management consulting firm she co-founded, Tricia draws from a multifaceted background in marketing, the performing arts, and community engagement to enhance the skills of individuals and teams. She earned her undergraduate degree from Wesleyan University and holds an MA in Education, Instructional Systems Development from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She was recently recognized by the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund as a top 40 under 40 changemaker in the county, and was named Miss Congeniality at the 2005 Miss Universe pageant, where she represented the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now we will get started. Tricia, take it away.
Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Caitlin mentioned, I coach and teach full-time MBA, MS, and EMBA students at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. And I'll start by telling you a little bit about my passion for this work. I'm originally from St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and St. Thomas is a 32 square mile, really stunning, beautiful Caribbean paradise, but tourism is the main industry, and there's not much opportunity in terms of career trajectory. So those of us with ambition know that education is really the way out. And I moved to the continental U.S. for undergrad, where I attended Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And I learned two life lessons at Wesleyan. First, just because it's sunny out doesn't mean it's warm outside. No, really, I was confused to learn that it could be bright and sunny outside and be 30 degrees. And second, I needed to learn how to code switch. My Caribbean dialect confused people and impacted the way that I was seen. At times, I mispronounced words, and I'll probably mispronounce words on this call, and my grammar wasn't great, because we have our own unique subject-verb agreement in our Caribbean dialect. So for example, at home, I would say, "How old you is?" Or "Where you going?" And at West, I was met with blank stares and a lot of questions. So right or wrong, I dedicated time trying to fix how I spoke and how I carried myself. I really had to crack what it meant to be in New England. So way back in undergrad, I learned how important spoken word is to getting your message across, and I personally understand the power of executive presence in terms of unlocking potential. And now let's talk a little bit about today's objectives. On this webinar, we're going to examine just a few components that characterize executive presence, or more so just presence generally. We say executive, but this is really important for folks at all levels. I have a three-part framework for deconstructing presence. And with each element, I'll share tactics to improve how you are perceived in a variety of diverse business contexts. So I'll talk specifically about presentations, group discussions or team meetings, and one-on-one interactions. So let's start by answering the question, what is executive presence? So this is the interactive portion of the webinar. How do you define executive presence? Tell me, let us know in the chat window that should be at the bottom right of your screen. What comes to mind when you think of executive presence? And I'll give you a few seconds, and I've got my eye out on the chat box. So what is executive presence? Poise, I see poise, excellent. I see confidence, maturity, being a problem solver, being there and listening. Yes, we'll talk a little bit about that today. Gravitas. Yes, the elusive term gravitas, right? Having people respect you. Fantastic. Being trusted. I love that. Thank you, Elizabeth. Engagement, right? And I hope I'm modeling some of that engagement for you here today. Clarity. Yes, clarity, being clear, being concise, being direct. Excellent, Brian. And demonstrating leadership. Wonderful. All of this is great. And as you can see, there's a lot of different elements that make up executive presence. Executive presence is all of these things that you all have mentioned and shared, and much, much more. And executive presence, as I'll use the term today, is the ability to authentically connect with and motivate others. It's critical to success as a leader. And it's an increasingly important and yet somehow elusive leadership characteristic. And it's a hot topic, right? I did a search for executive presence on Amazon, and over 180 results came up with executive presence in the title or the focus. It's also what brought you all to today's call. So contrary to some of the literature that's out there, I won't be telling you how to dress or teaching you business lunch etiquette. Again, I'm going to focus on building connection. Executive presence, I really think, is about building connection. One of the leading authorities on executive presence, the Center for Talent Innovation, CTI, conducted a study on executive presence back in 2012. They held interviews and focus groups with a nationally representative sample of over 3,900 college-educated men and women of various ethnic backgrounds in white-collar positions. And their research found that EP, executive presence, depends on three things. Gravitas, which came up in the comment section, that's how you behave, that's what you do. Communication, how you speak, and appearance, how you look. And as you can see here, gravitas, the how you behave, is the larger piece of the pie. Well, what I've observed is that communication is often the way to build the gravitas piece. You show that you have gravitas, grit, and resilience, not only by what you do, but what you say, which is driven by how you see the world. And we'll unpack this a little bit more in a second. People also talk about presence as projecting confidence or, the way you dress, and all of this is important, yes. Yet, I've seen the CEO of Harley-Davidson come out on stage in boots, jeans, and a t-shirt, and he captured the attention and held their attention in the audience for 40 minutes. I mean, he did ride out on a chopper, so that might have helped, but one cannot deny that he has a strong presence. And don't get me wrong, appearance is important. Much to my husband's distress, I spend an incredible amount of my time on my hair and my nails and shopping. But ultimately, that really isn't our focus today. The bottom line is that people aren't born with executive presence. It's an acquired skill. It's a skill that you can hone and improve. And working on this can be messy and painful. And my framework that I'll share with you today offers a way through this growth process. Again, in my consulting work and my work with students at Smith and reflecting on my experiences in the corporate and nonprofit sectors, I found that to truly exude presence, one must be able to connect with others. And in order to do this effectively, you have to be present and mindful. Executive presence in my book comes down to three ideas. Now, I'm sure you're asking, wait, what does this have to do with executive presence? I use the three wise monkeys, sometimes called the three mystic apes, to illustrate this framework because there are various meanings ascribed to the monkeys and the proverb. In the Western world, the phrase, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, is sometimes used to refer to plausible deniability, right? To those who deal with impropriety by turning a blind eye. But the proverb also has associations with being of good mind, speech, and action. So, like the three monkeys, this idea of presence is culturally relative. The main ideas or tenets shift depending on the cultural context. And I use the term culture loosely. This can refer to organizational culture. Again, to truly exude presence, One must communicate effectively by being present and mindful. Presence is really just about being present. And looking again at the three monkeys, here's how I break down presence and its relation to cultural competency. See cultural contexts. This is awareness. Awareness as it pertains to body language, vocal presence, personal awareness of your own cultural identity and differences. And I define culture simply as a way of life. This is about seeing the world around you as it happens. Hear others and allow ourselves to be heard. Hearing is going a step beyond awareness. It's taking it all in. It's the ability to read a room, to receive others' personal narratives without judgment, and to model vulnerability, build trust, and make space for others to be their full, authentic selves. And finally, speak truth to power. Speaking truth to power is the manifestation of building the other two skills. This is a comfort with and a skill in storytelling, the ability to develop your own story, to facilitate the exchange of stories, and then to present with impact, utilizing oral communication skills, storytelling, and technology to spark connection and bring about change. Let's dig deeper into each of these three dimensions of presence, starting with seeing. In order to see, one must first become self-aware. I was recently helping a client prepare for a keynote that she'll be delivering at a national conference, and her talk is related to diversity and inclusion. She was using these academic terms like internalized racial inferiority and superiority, and I was challenging her to make her points a little more accessible through the use of metaphors and analogies, which are really powerful storytelling devices. We'll get more to that a little bit later. And we were searching for an analogy to describe socialization. But how do you distill the dense concept of socialization for a keynote speech? So after some discussion, she talked about how we're trained to say please and thank you all of our lives. And I thought it was brilliant. This is something that's so ingrained in us. We are so hardwired that we say please and thank you without thought or consideration. This is one of the most universal cultural norms. But we're all socialized differently. So ask yourself, what are the ways that you are socialized? Regardless of your identity or your political beliefs, we can all benefit from digging deeper and doing what we call the self-work, right? Necessary to see, to truly see ourselves and others around us. This is a social identity wheel from my colleagues at Montgomery College. There are many versions of this. You can just Google social identity wheel, and you can use this to think about your personality and the different dimensions of your identity. I share this because in order to see, you must explore your lens. Explore the roots of your identity. Who are you? Who are your people? Who are the people and the experiences that made you? Who shaped your thoughts? Once you do this deeply personal work, you can then begin to identify power dynamics, tensions, similarities, differences of experience that might exist within a group or between and across groups when communicating, working in, and leading teams across difference. And this isn't a one-time activity. You should constantly be going back and asking these questions. Some refer to this as emotional intelligence. Given the increased diversity of teams and the increased complexity of global marketplaces, it's critical that leaders and managers hone this ability to put yourself inside someone else's shoes. You have to be able to see and hear someone who is very different, and this is a prized characteristic these days. Ask the tough questions. Who am I? What are my deeply ingrained personal tics or habits? Where am I? What are my core skill sets? Is it people? Is it processes? Is it technology? Is it data? You got to be aware of your strengths, your limitations, and your values. What do I absolutely enjoy doing? When am I my best? And finally, what about me? What about me fascinates others? This is also known as your personal brand. A key tenet of my personal brand is that I bring the fun, okay? And my friends at Alumni Relations will tell you this in any workshop that I do. In my workshops, my classes, I often refer to myself as the camp counselor. It's important to me to learn names, to facilitate icebreakers, and to do interactive games. I love having people up on their feet. And when I pass my colleagues and coworkers or my students in the halls, I don't ask them, how are you? I ask them, tell me some good news. So for those of you who are familiar with Gallup's Strengths Finder, positivity is my #1 strength. This is a brand that I've cultivated and that I'm really well known for. And there are many self-assessments out there. Some are available for free. DISC, Myers-Briggs, Hogan, Career Leader, SCARF, StrengthsFinder, SDI. I've done all of these. I actually came up with the list by pulling my 3-ring binder of assessments. Do these assessments, revisit them, create personal development plans for yourself. But note that no assessment is perfect, and they're really just tools to help you analyze your core competencies, support your development and growth, and know and see what differentiates you, what sets you apart. What is it that you do that exudes presence? Again, this is all a part of the seeing piece. I received my coaching certification from Corporate Class. They're based in Toronto, Canada, and they have a free reputation capital quiz online. We, the alumni relations folks and I will share the link in a follow-up email after this webinar. And after this session, maybe towards the end, I'll share another one of my favorite assessments to help you identify how you are seen by others. I would give it to you now, but I know I'll probably lose some of you looking for the assessment. So finally, another part of seeing, of presence, of truly being present, is asking yourself, what stops you from being present? When are you not listening or engaged? How much attention am I paying when someone is talking? Why am I not listening? Why am I distracted? Is there something that they are saying or doing that's upsetting me in some way? This is known as your triggers. We could do a whole other webinar on triggers, but just in short, I'll share one of my triggers and how it's deeply rooted in my own socialization. So when I'm teaching a class, one of my biggest pet peeves is when a student is just slumped or slouched in their chair. And I know that this comes from the fact that I went to a small private school for middle and high school, and it was literally beaten into me to sit up straight, to stand tall, to be at attention. And so when I see a student slouching, I automatically ascribe the following. I'm like, they're lazy, they're disengaged, they're bored, they're disrespecting me, sit up and listen. This is the dialogue that happens in my head. And so I shared this story with a group of mid-level professionals at a workshop recently, and an older gentleman shared, oh, well, I'm slouching because I have a back problem, and so sitting up is uncomfortable. Well, that really shifted my perspective a little bit. And it's taken some deep digging and personal sharing for me to acknowledge the origin of that specific trigger and work through it. I've written off so many students who may have just been uncomfortable sitting the way that I expect them to. This is seeing. Again, this is all just the seeing piece. And here are the tactics. These are some tactics to seeing cultural context and seeing yourself and others more deeply. In presentations, in terms of knowing your audience, this is about demographics and much, much more. Do what you can to find out about their familiarity with the topic, their level of experience. What might their favorability be towards the information that you're presenting? Use this to determine the appropriate order or sequence that you'll present the information in. So should the bottom line be up front? Are they data folks? Do they need numbers, right? You need to know who your audience is going to be. In group discussions and team meetings, track dynamics. Reflect on what you're seeing. Who's talking? Who's not contributing? Are there any patterns or trends? Do you notice that, oh, wow, all of the women seem to speak about this particular issue? Or, oh, the senior leaders seem to dominate this particular issue. Reflect on how you're contributing and what you bring. And in one-on-one interactions, maintain eye contact. This is critical, but again, this is culturally specific. And then try to suspend judgment. We'll talk more about this when we talk about hearing. And for all three of these contexts, presentations, meetings, and one-on-one, try to find out your stakeholders' preferred mode of communication. Is it email? Is it text? Is it face-to-face? This is all, again, a part of seeing. Okay, there's a lot involved with seeing. That's a big chunk. But now let's move on to hearing. We hear a lot of advice and tactics about how to speak well. I spend about 90% of my time coaching on presentation skills and public speaking. But there's a very, very, very little out there about the equally important art of listening properly to others. In order to build your presence and fuel connection, utilize active listening techniques, practicing empathy and perspective taking. Practice listening for understanding and asking powerful questions. Ask yourself, what are strategies that I can use to retain information and listen more deeply? What can you use as a means to improve your listening? Are you a note taker? Does it help to have paper, a whiteboard, or to debrief and process with other people, or even leverage technology? This will differ from person to person, and make sure that you're not using your notebook as a way to actually disconnect and hide in your notebook or laptop. I find that I am guilty of this. And one of my favorite examples of a brilliant leader who is truly listening and hearing the staff in her organization is a nonprofit that I did some consulting for. We began the engagement with a series of surveys, focus groups, and one-on-one conversations with staff. And throughout this process, the ED came to see that many of the tactics that they had in mind would not be in the best interest of the organization. So this listening stage of the assessment and analysis is a really critical piece to any organizational change process. And what I'd like to challenge you to do is to approach your presentations, your one-on-one discussions, and your small group interactions with this same attention to listening. Effective listening at all levels fuels connection. And here are some tips to becoming a better listener. Listening starts with setting the stage to listen. Make eye contact, ignore outside factors, minimize noise, and most importantly, don't interrupt. This one is a big challenge. Sometimes we interrupt others by finishing their sentences because we're so excited that we're thinking along the same lines, or at least we think we are. This one is a real challenge for me. And listening is more than just paying attention and making eye contact. You have to show that you're listening and truly hearing others by asking probing questions and paraphrasing what you've heard. This is called active listening. Here are a few active listening techniques. Encourage others to share. Urge clarification. Don't moralize or pass judgment. Separate agreement from, and that should be criticism. Separate disagreement from criticism. And finally, ask powerful questions. This is also a whole other webinar in and of itself. Powerful questions are open-ended and generative. They ask the respondent to think and reflect. A powerful question will give you opinions and feelings. They deliberately seek longer responses, right? So this is steering away from a yes or no answer. So for example, you can ask, are you happy with this vendor? Or you can ask, how is that relationship going? And sometimes our questions are laden with judgment, right? You're not going to sign that contract, right? That's a loaded question. I clearly think it's a bad idea for you to sign that contract. My favorite open-ended generative question, or it's really more of a statement, is say more. You can also say, could you elaborate a little bit more on this? I'd like to make sure that we're on the same page. Or why do you think this happens? Or what do you think we can learn from this situation? And finally, a piece of hearing is reflecting on your own communication style. Ask yourself, how can I say this better? Here are listening tactics. In presentations, focus on audience engagement. Get them involved. Ask them questions. And make sure to leave room for Q&A. It's easy to think, okay, I have 20 minutes for this presentation. I'm going to prepare 20 minutes of content because I'm afraid of the Q&A, right? But really, you want your presentation to be a conversation. You're talking to one person in the room. Prepare for that Q&A, but make sure that you leave room for it. In group discussions and team meetings, invite others into the conversation and get comfortable with silence. In seeing, right, in our seeing section, we talked about being aware of who is not engaged, who's talking, who's dominating the space. Active listening and hearing is now about engaging those people. Invite them into the conversation. You could say, hey, Ben, I haven't heard from you. Do you have anything to add? You can also use body language as a prompt. Oh, I saw some head smiles and some nods. Anyone have anything to add? Any additional thoughts? Naming dynamics and inviting others into the conversation is the essence of what commanding the room is. In terms of getting comfortable with silence, oftentimes we're not comfortable with silence and we take up too much space. We just talk and talk and talk. And getting comfortable with silence allows us to make space for others. In one-on-one conversation, mirror what you're hearing. Listen to understand, not to debate or to relate. Again, focus on hearing others, not putting yourself and your experience or your point of view into their story. And now let's talk about our favorite pastime, speaking. Once you've done the self-work and you recognize how others perceive you at your best, and you've been practicing and honing your listening skills, only then can you identify strategies to improve your ability to be noticed and memorable. I call this nugget speaking truth to power. Speaking truth to power means believing deeply in what you say and fighting every day to have that heard. It may not be popular, it means taking a risk, and it means standing for something. This is really the gravitas piece that the Center for Talent Innovation says makes up over 60% of executive presence. Be a passionate presenter. Have an authentic expression of commitment, motivation, and drive that shows people you really believe in what you do or what you're proposing. Some key elements of speaking truth to power. First off, be mindful of your body language. The body speaks before the mouth ever opens, and this encompasses gestures, handshake, eye contact, facial expressions, and more. Patsy Rodenberg is the director of voice at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and I highly recommend her book called The Second Circle. It's the most illustrative reading on presence that I've encountered to date, and she talks about 3 circles of being. These circles describe the way that human energy moves, all throughout your body, your breath, your voice, how you listen, how you think, how you feel. And you feel this energy, as do the others around you. It's completely tangible. So here's how Patsy describes 3 circles. The first circle is an inward moving, drawing energy towards itself. So this is when you're sitting on the couch and watching Netflix. And I'll share something with you. I'm actually standing right now to present this webinar. If I were to sit, right, my chest would be collapsed on itself. My head would be down. It would change the quality of my voice. So that's that collapsed energy. This is when you're sitting on the couch watching Netflix. Your energy is focused inward and collapsed on itself. And the opposite extreme is the third circle, which energy is forced outwards towards the world in general. I'm a little bit in this third circle phase because I can't see you, I can't get head nods, I can't smile at you. So I'm kind of in a performative space. This is the feeling when someone is kind of talking over you. This is like an actor is overacting. It's like a big performative energy. And in the second circle, this is bringing it down a notch, energy is focused on a specific object or person. And it's moving in both directions, both taking and giving. And operating from within that second circle is what actors, athletes, and leaders who possess it. It's like this elusive X factor. This is what they have in common. This is what Patsy argues in her book. And again, highly recommend it. And when we move through all 3 circles, the argument is that we move through all 3 circles rapidly and within seconds throughout the day. And we need to be able to access all 3 of these circles during the course of a day. So you don't always live in the second circle. You don't always live in the first circle. But we navigate in and out of these circles. And I found this framing just as helpful as advice to watch your posture. Yes, posture and gestures and eye contact is important. But ultimately, presence is about being present and open. Is your body language and your gestures indicating that you're open? And are you signaling to others that you're open to both giving and receiving energy? I'll take us through a few more components of this speaking truth to power piece. The first is storytelling. You want to develop engaging, illustrative, and efficient stories and explanations that quickly get to the point without losing important context or content. Think visually. And use vivid visual language. Use stories, analogies, and metaphors to help your message stick. For example, I can tell you that during Snowmageddon back in 2010, we got 38 inches of snow. Or I can tell you that after 5 days, holed up in our stuffy apartment, eating ramen noodles, peanut butter and jelly, and draining our wine cabinet, we stepped out the front door and found ourselves chest deep in snow. Which one of those sticks? Do you remember 38 inches, or do you remember us finding ourselves chest deep in snow? Warm up. Nerves and anxiety often come up in my workshops, and I advise students and executives to design a personal warm-up routine or a checklist to become centered and mentally and physically prepared for presentations, interviews, difficult conversations, and meeting facilitation. I actually do a full 30-minute actor's vocal and physical warm-up before I speak or present. And it might feel goofy, but trust me, it works. If an actor's warm-up isn't for you, you can take a walk, you can just do some deep breathing, make sure that you rest, you can stretch, or you can just repeat a positive affirmation. Whatever helps you to get grounded, to get engaged, and again, in the present moment. So I can coach students and say, all right, you're pacing too much, or you're walking back and forth too much, or the way you're holding your arms is distracting. Or I can say, warm up physically and vocally, get grounded and centered. And all the other elements fall into place. Yes, and. This is one of my favorite rules to building connection, the improv concept of yes, and. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Try to avoid using the word but. When your audience hears but, and this is audience in terms of presentations or one-on-ones, it feels as though you've disconnected, you've discounted. You've disconnected from them and discounted everything that they have said. Make sure that those around you feel heard and acknowledged by acknowledging their point of view. So you want to say yes and build on their perspective or point of view. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a senior level government official who had the habit of responding to their constituents with, well, actually, right? So if someone complained about an issue, this person responded with, well, actually, XYZ is working on that. And we worked together to practice active listening and mirroring to shift their response to a yes, I hear you. I acknowledge your humanity. And this is the current status of the situation. That's the underlying gist of yes and. Yes, I hear you. I see you. And let's build on that. Here's my perspective or contribution. As my grandmother always says, there's no man is an island unto himself, meaning that we're all better off if we build on each other's ideas. And finally, the final piece of this speaking truth to power is using powerful language. Use powerful language and phrases. Don't be afraid to explicitly say, my challenge, my worry or concern, or my issue with this is. Have a strong point of view. And use a balance of data points and feelings. So make sure to speak to the right brain and the left brain, folks. And slow down your rate of speech. This one is sometimes tough for me. Don't forget to keep breathing. I often get questions about how do we stop saying ums and like and so. And that's just about breath and breathing. You make your point, you say your thought, and you want to keep talking, you want to keep filling the air. So you say like, so. Just breathe. Make your point, breathe, and move into your next point. Here are some tactics to speaking truth to power. There are many elements that make presentations effective, including your body language, your gestures, vocal projection, articulation, tone, pace, pitch, volume. There's just so much. And this all comes, I promise you, this all comes if you remember to slow down and breathe. In group discussions and team meetings, amplify the voices of others and link and connect ideas between people, between thoughts. In one-on-one interactions, use I statements and share the airtime. Remember, this is a giving and a receiving of information, not a performance. So what can you do? You know, I've shared some tactics here today for each of these three pillars: the seeing cultural context, the being heard, and the hearing others, and also speaking truth to power. Leaders with strong presence are composed and communicate with confidence and speak with impact. And the art of presence starts with seeing your audience, and also seeing yourself, otherwise known as knowing your audience. And then be open to hearing. Practice a process of constant inquiry, reflection, and seeking feedback. Listen deeply to establish strong connections. And watch people and their body language. Watch people who have presence. Who pulls you in? Who around you is in that second circle of being? People gravitate towards them. They're giving, they're receiving. And how can you speak truth to power vividly, visually, and in a concise and compelling way? And finally, this comes with intentional practice, practice, practice. Practice staying in this present moment. Practice both giving and receiving energy. And now I'll take your questions.
Thank you, Tricia. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel.
Hello, what was the book called again? All right, let's see. I have a few books I recommend. The one that I just mentioned. Oh wait, can you see the questions in the? Are the questions showing to everyone? Let me see. Oh, no, okay. I got some no's. So here are some books that I recommend. So the Center for Talent and Innovation published this executive presence book, I think back in, the study was done in 2012. I'm looking to see if the book is on my shelf. I'm not sure exactly what year it was published, but this is a fantastic book because they go through various case studies. You know, so how did these specific leaders handle these specific issues in history? You know, like the BP oil spill, or different congressional folks who have dealt with sexual impropriety and that sort of thing. And so they look at specific leaders, and if you like case studies and you enjoy reading about specific business scenarios, I highly recommend Executive Presence. And the next one is TED Talks. This is written by Chris Anderson, who runs and founded the TED organization. I love this book. It also speaks to specific skills around presenting, but then it gives examples of great talks. And so they'll say, all right, this Rita Pearson talk where she talks about teaching and learning, the closing is very strong. And you can go and watch the talk. Or this Amy Cuddy TED Talk on presence, she has a really clear call to action. Again, you can go and watch the talk. And finally, this book about presentation skills in 7 simple steps, it's probably about 30 pages. It's a really tiny, great manual to have in your back pocket to remember different tips and tricks around your gestures, your physical posture, and you know, things like going to see the room before you present in a space. Things like how to print your script in terms of the size of the font, or whether or not you do it double-sided. So really great handbook. And then the third book that I talked about during the presentation was Patsy Rosenberg, and it's called The Second Circle. And it's really written with actors in mind. It's about how can an actor be present. I have a theater background, and so it talks about giving and receiving energy and presence. All right. You have a lot of online call-in meetings. Any tips on executive presence on that medium? Absolutely. Hey, Andres. Hey! It's one of my former students. Really great to see you on here. Doing great things. So I would say the number one thing that I do is standing. So again, right now I'm standing for this webinar. smiling, and I'm sure you've heard some of these tips already, making sure that you're smiling, that reach through the phone, and then making sure that you're not backlit, that there's not clutter in your in the frame, and that the computer is at eye level. So oftentimes we sit at our desks. Right now, my computer, although you're not seeing me, my computer is stacked on three ring binders. So just really setting yourself up to look attractive, whether that's dressing appropriately, whether that's putting some powder on your face, even if you're a male, so that you don't come across as like greasy and shiny, and then making sure that you're not backlit. So many questions. Caitlin, Danielle, have you all been reading these, or do you see themes as to what's come up? Huh.
Do you have key advice for women in particular on how to develop that executive presence, and what are some common pitfalls to avoid?
Excellent, excellent, excellent question. And this book by Sylvia Ann Hewlett is really great for that. She talks about how executive presence really is this expectation that we all navigate the world as a white male. And that is really challenging for women. That, I personally have challenges with my pitch, my vocal pitch, my vocal fray, right? And so I warm up physically, because research shows, and I think Margaret Thatcher famously did this, lowering her voice an octave makes you more heard, makes you seem more credible. And so some things to avoid as women, it's revealing clothing, and all of this is problematic, but unfortunately it's the landscape that we navigate. It's really focusing and thinking about, how can I best be heard? And yes, some of it is biased, and again, right or wrong, but it's the culture that we are navigating. And I would say to, as you climb the ladder and as you get to different levels, how can you push the grain? So how can you say, okay, yeah, well, I've lost some of myself and I've adapted in some ways, but now that I am in XYZ position, I am going to give my staff some leeway. I'm going to have this conversation openly and honestly. I am going to wear my, African print head wrap, because I am now in a position where I don't feel the need to conform. So it's a constant give and take, a reading of the culture of your organization, and a little bit of molding yourself to fit. Or it's sometimes leaving. Like, really, sometimes it's like, well, this isn't the right environment for me, because I am not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not respected, I'm talked over, I'm not taken seriously because my voice is shrill. And vocal issues is one of the biggest issues that I see with women, and then also their use of language. So apologizing before you speak. Sorry, but I have a question, or I was thinking, I was about to say blah, blah, blah. Well, you weren't about to say it, just say it. We don't need to qualify what we have to say. I'm a person who speaks very little, and when I do speak in a meeting, I make sure that my voice fills the room, and I make sure that what I have to say has gravitas. And oftentimes, I think we undercut ourselves by over talking.
There are a few questions about navigating interruptions, and how do you navigate a corporate culture where interrupting others is the norm?
That's a really tough question. I have a really good friend who deals with this quite a bit at work, and I've been working with her to kind of coach her through this, and we've taken a lot of different approaches. I can honestly say I really can't say that I have the answer. But one of the things I know that happened to her that she did was that she would shut down. So someone would interrupt her and she would just kind of stop talking. And one of the things we talked about is, how can you make sure that you don't lose your voice, right? And identifying that as a trigger for her, and then kind of reframing her perspective and the way that she was feeling in that moment, so that she could, make her point and bring the conversation back to her. I also think that this is about allyship. So when you do see that someone is being interrupted, how can you say, oh, so back to that point that Kristen was just making. Or Kristen, you were starting to speak, right? What exactly were you, what were you touching on? And so it really takes a community. It really takes a community of people to shift a culture. It's really not, you can't be an island unto yourself. And I think that that comes with having these open, honest, authentic conversations in your teams to say, hey, did you realize that XYZ tends to interrupt? How can you support me by amplifying my voice in the next meeting? Yeah, I have read Executive Presence and found it full of conflicting advice for women. If authenticity is so important to executive presence, women are given more advice on how to conform than to be authentic. I completely agree. I completely agree. I enjoyed the read. I took from it what I did take from it. But I would say, that this is about authenticity. And if that communication and connection are really about authenticity, and if you're finding yourself in an environment where you have to conform to the point where you feel like you're losing yourself, that maybe that's not the right environment. I know that's tough kind of advice or commentary to give, but I also had a difficult time with the book as well. But again, there's some great examples. There really are some great examples, and the research is really powerful. What else? How can others see or hear this presentation? I think that's going to be offered. Anything else? Am I missing anything?
Tricia, do you have advice for different size groups, whether you're addressing a small group versus a larger group?
Absolutely not. So here's what I think. I think that in addressing a group, giving a presentation, you're ultimately talking to one person. Whether I'm working with a group of 20 or I'm presenting to 277 people, I am framing and thinking of this as a conversation. I mean, if you're facilitating something, it's a workshop, you want to think about getting people up on their feet and having activities and, doing things like gallery walks. Yes, that'll change depending on the size of the group. But you really want to slow down. You want to breathe. You want to be open. And talking about being open a little bit, I'll say that is about posture in the sense of you're rolling your shoulders back. Your arm movements are open. Your stance is open. You're grounded. This you do whether it's a group of 20 or it's a group of 200. Oh, I have one more slide I wanted to share. This is the assessment that I talked about earlier that I really love, and I highly recommend you all do this. There is a paid version, but you can get your report for free, kind of an initial report. It's called How to Fascinate. So you want to go to howtofascinate.com. Her name is Sally Hogshead. She's done research on kind of the way people perceive you, and there's a free personality test, and you can find different adjectives that describe you. So you're going to go to take the free test, how do I fascinate? And then there's 7 languages of fascination. You're either an innovator, or you're passionate, you have power when you speak, power when you navigate the world, prestige, you build trust with folks, you're a little mysterious, with mystique, or you're alert, you're someone who pays attention to detail. And so she tells you which of these kind of personality types or archetypes describes you. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use this assessment. You can use it in terms of the way that you think about writing your LinkedIn bio, or the way that you introduce yourself in a workshop or in a presentation, the stories that you tell. Because if others are fascinated by your stability, your dependability, your familiarity, your ability to build trust, lean into that. Use that in the way that you talk about yourself. And one of mine is passion. And so, I use that passion. I use that expressiveness. I use that engagement in the way that I approach the world. So I highly recommend you doing this How to Fascinate assessment. It really helps you figure out how others see you. For storytelling, would you suggest including or not including stories about your children or parenthood, especially if you're a woman? Sometimes judgments are made based on the stories you tell. Excellent question. I think this comes down to knowing your audience, because to some, this children or parenthood might endear the audience to you, right? But yet maybe for some groups there are judgments that are made. And I would say it's about knowing your audience and how you might be perceived. That's part of the homework, the planning that goes into choosing the stories. Another thing I'd say about stories is to make sure that you're telling stories that kind of you have come to terms with. The last thing that we want is you as a presenter kind of crying about some story that is deeply personal that you haven't healed or done the work around. Suppose you're in a group conversation and notice that someone has not voiced any comments. However, when you ask that person if they have any thoughts, they say no. What's a way to keep them still engaged in the conversation? Great question. I think it's okay if folks don't have a voice or a comment. If you are the leader of this group, I would say make sure that you provide multiple opportunities for people to engage. So, okay, I have open office hours, or I'll be available in the room here about 10, 15 minutes after class. I'm always available for a good 30 minutes after my classes because there are students who won't raise their hands in class. Even if I call on them cold, they will not offer anything. And then at the end of class, I have a line outside my door because they have questions. I often tell folks, if you have a question, ask it to the group because other people probably still have the same question. And I keep coming back to that. So I also really think this is about setting norms for the way that you want a particular group that you're leading or that you're a part of to operate. So naming, speak up if you have a question. That's really important. We all learn from that, and really coming back to this concept over and over again, and then having alternative modes of engagement for folks. So whether it's office hours or it's staying late, leaving a few minutes after the meeting, or it's surveys that go out, or it's an open-ended form that people can fill out. Or the suggestion box that's actually never really actually used, but providing the multiple forms and then pulling them aside and having that one-on-one conversation. Did you have anything that you wanted to share? Are you okay with the fact that I called you into the conversation? Let's go back up. Early in this webinar, you mentioned that this presentation regarded white-collar executive presence. Why was this differentiation made? Oh, interesting. And in so doing, were you intentionally meaning to exclude blue-collar executive presence? If so, what would you say are the differences in white-collar versus blue-collar? By the way, okay, yeah, I actually, that is the language that the Center for Talent Innovation uses when they talk about the survey that they administered and who they spoke to. So that wasn't a conscious choice that I made. And then body posture is so important, and recognizing elders in a business setting reaps many unexpected benefits. Excellent. Body posture is so important, and recognizing elders in a business setting reaps many unexpected. Michael, could you say a little bit more about recognizing elders in a business setting? So questions for foreign nationals, tips to navigating some biases. I said earlier when I introduced myself that this is a right or wrong. I really dedicated time to trying to fix how I spoke. And I think that some folks are often told, like, go see an accent coach, or, work on your accent if you're a foreign national. And really it's about doing your homework and knowing the environment that you're in. So whether that's learning cultural norms around the sports that people talk about or the TV shows that people watch. And if you feel as though having an accent is getting in your way, working on that, not for the benefit of others, but for the benefit of yourself. So I have a student who did get accent reduction coaching, and really it wasn't so much about other people, but they were able to feel more confident after doing the accent reduction coaching. I think, not being native born to the United States can be really difficult, both in reading the room and knowing what is and isn't appropriate to say, and then also, yes, navigating biases that might be geared towards you. And it's that work, it's the practice that it takes to ask the difficult questions, to really build a relationship and build connections with people that can help support you through navigating that, and that you can have the honest, authentic conversations about what you're feeling. Like, I'm feeling some kind of way about XYZ. Is it me, or have you observed XYZ? But really being able to process what it is that you're feeling and what you're experiencing. My company does accent reduction training, and it is all about building the confidence, exactly, through building spoken clarity. I like this.
All right, it looks like we've covered all of our questions. Tricia, is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap up?
Yeah, I see one last question, which I'll take because this I deal with this. If you have a smaller body or a frame and sit in a formal chair, possibly massive, what is the best way to sit? Great question. So you want to have both feet on the floor, if possible. So that means leaning forward, sitting on the edge of your chair, really kind of getting rid of that space between you and the back of the chair. If you're sitting all the way back and you sunken into the chair, you tend to make yourself invisible. And that's something that I've had to navigate and is critical. Is just even in the way that you sit in a meeting, so that you are seen, so that you're both seen and you're heard.